My dear friends, Stephen Crane was an American poet in the late 1800s, and he wrote a short poem. It goes like this. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." "However," replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me the sense of obligation." Now, the point of that is that you can go outside and you can shake your fist at the wind and yell at the clouds and insist that the universe must pay attention to you and that things should go the way that you think that they should go. But the universe doesn't care. You are not in control, especially of weather and nature. Now, I think we Southern Wisconsinites should know that just as well as ever, because last night we had, again, another tornado. And what we had a week where we had 3. And, there's something very, very humbling about all these storms that we're getting, because it doesn't matter how inconvenient it is. It doesn't matter what you're doing in the moment. It doesn't matter what if you have a 1-year-old child in the other room who's asleep and you prefer to keep it that way. It doesn't matter if you're watching a really good TV show. It doesn't matter if you're working out. It doesn't matter if you have friends over. The storm's coming. And your job is to get out of the way, or else you are going to get hurt. Can you imagine how ridiculous it would be to see someone go outside of his house and tell the coming storm, "Knock it off. Go away. Now's not a good time. I have people over. I have early morning tomorrow. Now's just not a good time. Pipe down. Go away." Right? Honestly, if you saw that, you would probably think to yourself, what? Who does that? Well, today we see someone do just that. But we see a man actually in the midst of a storm on a boat stand up and rebuke the winds and the waves, and they listen. Immediately, just like that, the clouds go away, and the water is perfectly calm, like glass. And those who are with them in the boat are not just scared of dying in the storm, no, now they're terrified, because in the same boat as them is not just a good teacher or a wise leader, but he himself who controls and created the weather, the wind, the waves, the entire universe. That in the boat with them is, well, the theme for today, Jesus, the Lord of the storm. And the fact that Jesus is the Lord of the storm, that has 2 major implications for us today that I want to go through. Number 1, Jesus is good, but he's not tame. Jesus is good, but he's not tame. And the second point, that although Jesus allows storms, he never leaves the boat. But first, Jesus is good, not tame. Up to Mark chapter 4, we see that Jesus has been this entire day, he's actually been in a boat a little bit off the shore on the Sea of Galilee, and there's probably thousands of people on the shore listening to him. And what he's doing is, it's kind of a natural microphone, right? When the water is calm, it carries your voice really, really well. And so Jesus is using the water to make his teaching really available for thousands of people at once. It's a really smart thing to do. But at the end of that day, it's starting to get dark, the sun started to set. He decides that he wants to let the people go home, and that he himself, because he's a human being, he's exhausted. He's been healing and teaching and preaching for months now. He wants to go to the other side of the river. And so he doesn't actually even go on shore. He has his disciples, who a lot of them are professional fishermen, get their boats, and he actually just goes from boat to boat. And then he goes and he says, "Hey, we're going to the other side of the lake." And they're going to travel through the night. Except this specific night, a storm is coming. Now, that wasn't super uncommon. The Sea of Galilee, which is about 7 miles by 13 miles, so it's actually not really a sea, it's more of a lake. It's actually smaller than Lake Winnebago. It's surrounded by mountains, and it's actually the lowest freshwater lake in the entire world, in the entire planet Earth. Like it's the lowest one. It's several hundred feet below sea level. But here's the fascinating thing. Although it's very low and it's in this kind of bowl of hills and mountains, Only 30 miles away is Mount Hermon, which is the highest point in Israel. And so that's 9,000 feet above sea level. So within 30 miles, you have this huge difference of height. So what's going to happen? Well, you have that warm desert air of the Jordan Valley mixing with the cold air of the mountains, and they're going to mix. And you know what happens when you get really, really cold air with really, really warm air? Storms, violent ones. And so the Sea of Galilee was actually a pretty risky place to sail, because you would have these storms just show up out of nowhere. And within minutes, you could have a really, really calm lake. Within minutes, you can have a storm on your hands. But this specific storm had to have been really, really severe. Because remember, these are professional fishermen. Like Peter, James, and John, they fished for a living on the Sea of Galilee. They knew what they were doing. They had been through plenty of storms in their life. And they thought they were going to die. And so they're getting the water out of the boat because they're going to drown. The boat's going to go down. It's going to get small. And while they're getting this water out of the boat, trying to stay alive, they're probably thinking, wait, where's Master? Where's Jesus? Have you seen Jesus? And this boat's probably about 20, 25 feet long. And so they're getting the water out of the boat. And he's asleep. He's on a cushion. We're about to die. What are we doing? And so they go and say, if you don't mind, wait, don't you care? We're going to die. You too. And Jesus, they probably expected him to maybe, help or help get water. He doesn't do that. No, he just stands up and says, pipe down. The way that he talks to the wind and the waves is the same way that you would rebuke a child. Knock it off. Be quiet, stay quiet. And the wind and the waves obey him like a child, because in a sense they are his children, they are his creation. And the sky is clear, just like that. And what should have taken hours for the waves to become calm, no, it's all clear, it's all like glass. And the disciples, who were formerly afraid of dying, now are terrified, as they stand in the presence of the man that controls the wind and the waves, and they ask, who is this? Who is this? Now, before I go any further, I want to make this point. This happened. This happened. Now, I understand that this specific account is probably one of the more outlandish ones that you see in the Gospels, right? It's one thing for Jesus to heal people. It's one thing for Jesus to cast out demons and to teach with authority. That's one thing. For him to tell the wind and the waves to knock it off and, it obeys him, that's a whole other thing. And I understand that there are probably pastors at other churches that would, that would read this and they would say, probably not. No, this is probably just something maybe the disciples made up to kind of make Jesus seem more powerful than he was. This is probably embellished. Here's the thing. When you actually read the account, it's not written like a legend. Right? I mean, this is only 6 verses long. It's pretty short. But I want you to just read through it and notice how many unnecessary details are in this account. It's only 6 verses long, but it's with just unnecessary details. Look at this. Well, first of all, that it was toward the end of the day, right? It was sunset. Number one, and Jesus was on a boat in the sea. Number two, the fact that he doesn't actually go back on shore, just as he was. He goes on to another detail. Number four, the fact that he says, "Hey, we're going to go to the other side." Another detail. And then, while the storm is about to happen, Jesus is sleeping. Where is he sleeping? On a cushion. Where? In the stern. Again, all these little details. Well, why are there all these little details? Because this is not a carefully crafted story. It's an eyewitness account. And Mark, writing for probably the Apostle Peter's just telling him what he saw. And when you have those kinds of days where you really remember, they're really impactful on you, you're just telling what you saw, and you tell what you notice. And so that's exactly what Peter's doing. And so, if this is true, which we have every reason to believe it is, that means one thing. That means Jesus is completely unmanageable. Jesus is not taming. He is not controlled by us. He is not actually really understood by us. And here's what I mean. It would make a lot of sense if Jesus had warned the disciples, hey, let's not go sailing, let's wait for it tomorrow. Just trust me. And the disciples said, nah, come on, you're fine. And then, okay, that would make sense. And then they run on the storm because they disobey Jesus. And then we can take, hey, obey Jesus and things will go well. Right? That would make sense. But here's the thing. That's not what happened. No, Jesus very purposely has them go sail at that time, and they run into the storm. The reason they are in the middle of the storm is not because they disobeyed Jesus, but because they obeyed Jesus. Jesus purposely puts them into the storm, and he's asleep. He lets them think that they're going to die for a little bit. He lets them go through this. And Jesus actually does the same for us. Jesus allows us to endure storms that do not make sense, and he doesn't always get rid of them. Well, you see this all the time. Look at Job, a righteous man, a good Christian man, and God allows him. He can allow to suffer like he did. He allows him to suffer. Right? You see a man who's healthy and takes care of his body, and he's the one that gets cancer. You see a young Christian couple, and they're good, and they're good, nice Christian people. I've seen this countless times, and they ask God for a child, and God doesn't. But you see other couples who real and they have plenty of kids. You see, this one person, right? He's irresponsible. He doesn't really have his life together, and yet things go just fine, and everything's nice. He has a charmed life. Well, you have another person who's responsible and good and kind, and bad things just keep happening. It happens all the time. Life is filled with these storms that Jesus not only allows, but also Jesus doesn't give a reason for. And the real question is, if this is the kind of God Jesus is, completely untamable, in a lot of ways not understandable, and he is going to allow storms in my life that hurt and are difficult, and he's not going to tell me why, and he has the ability to take it away, and he doesn't, how can I trust him? How can I trust a God like that? Well, point number 2. Although Jesus allows storms, he never leaves the boat. Now, as you read this account, were you reminded of another story in the Old Testament? Can you think of the other time in the Bible where you have a religious teacher and he goes on this boat and then the boat goes out to sea and there's this terrible storm, and while this terrible storm is happening, that religious teacher is asleep and they wake him up and say, hey, don't you care we're going to drown? And then the religious teacher does something to stop the storm. Does that ring a bell? Jonah. Right, the prophet Jonah, and he gets eaten by the fish. Right, the prophet Jonah. The Mark is very clearly trying to make you think of Jonah. It's written almost the completely same way. But here's the thing. Here's the funny thing. Jonah, how does he stop the storm? Do you remember? He flings himself into the storm. He jumps into the storm, allows the storm to consume him, and that's how it ends. And the point that Mark is trying to make here is Jesus is really doing the same thing. As you look at the gospel, and take a step back and look at the larger view, Jesus does the same thing. Jesus came to let himself be consumed by the ultimate storm, the storm of God's wrath and anger and hell for everything that we've done, every sin that we've ever committed. We deserve to be consumed by the wrath of God and to be destroyed by the storm. We deserve to drown. And Jesus himself comes down and he flings himself into the storm of God's wrath and allows himself to be humiliated and crushed and killed because it should have been us. So that we could be forgiven, so that we wouldn't have to endure that kind of storm. And then he rises from the dead, rises from the grave, and proves that he is the ultimate Lord, not just of this storm in Mark chapter 4, but of every storm, every sadness, every tragedy, every disaster. He is in control of all of it. And he says to you, I have endured for you the ultimate storm. Now let me endure with you your storm. You see, Jesus never promises a storm-free life. In fact, quite the opposite. He actually says, hey, if you're going to be my follower and you're going to follow me and you're going to be a Christian, take up a cross. You got to follow me. You have to deny yourself. You should actually expect storms to come into your life. You should expect that. Jesus never promises that he's going to explain to you why he allows a specific thing to happen to you, which in fact, if you were in the middle of a storm, if you're in the middle of something really painful, would it actually help you to know why Jesus allowed that to happen to you? Would that actually help you? Would it take the pain away? No, it wouldn't. And Jesus never promises that the storms in your life aren't going to be painful and that they're not going to hurt. No, he actually says you're going to have pain, you're going to have discomfort, you're going to have sadness in this life. For what he promises is that he will never leave you. He will never abandon you. And that because he went through the ultimate storm, this storm may hurt you, it may damage you, but it will not drown you. It will not drown. I want you to go to the back of your bulletin and look at the hymn we're about to sing. And I want you to look at the third stanza, because sometimes, Christians, write stanzas and they really get it right. When through the deep waters, I call you to go. Again, Jesus is going to call you through deep waters sometimes. He's going to actually ask you to endure something painful. When through the deep waters, I call you to go, the rivers of sorrow shall not overflow. Although Jesus allows you to go through something painful, it will not destroy you. It will not drown you. It will not overtake you. It can. Why not? For I will be with you, your troubles to bless, and to sanctify to you your deepest distress. Do you know what that means? Not only does Jesus endure your storm with you, but he actually uses the storms of your life to strengthen you and to form you and to mold you, to make you kinder and nobler and humbler and stronger. It's not through all the blessings and the happy times that God makes you into who he wants you to be. It's actually through the hard times that Jesus molds you and forms you to be stronger. He actually uses the hardships in your life to bless you, even when you don't realize it in the moment. So therefore, what is the Christian called to do? Trust the Lord of the storm. Trust him. You look at the disciples, right? Jesus rebukes the disciples. I find it really interesting, not only what Jesus rebukes the disciples for, but what he doesn't rebuke the disciples for. Jesus doesn't say to them, hey, why did you wake me up? No, he doesn't say that. And he doesn't say, oh, come on, the storm's not that bad. You guys are being babies. No, he doesn't say that. He says, where's your faith? Where's your faith? It's not that the disciples were nervous about the storm. It's not that they woke him up and asked for his help. It's that they seriously thought that Jesus didn't care. And they had seen Jesus care for people. They should have known that Jesus loves people and is compassionate and kind from all of the ways that he healed people. And they should have known, right? Jesus said, hey, we're going to the other side. I'm calling. We're going to the other side. That's final. And they thought, well, I know what Jesus said. I know what he's done. But this storm is too big and too powerful. Jesus must be wrong. And Jesus is saying, don't do that. Don't do that. When I say we're going to the other side, I mean it. And there is no storm that's going to stop me from making my will be done. See, faith is not never being sad. Faith is not never being concerned about the storm in your life. And faith is actually, you think, oh, well, maybe if I really have faith, I'm not going to call out to Jesus, I'm just going to do it. No. You should. You should call out to Jesus. You should try to wake him up and get him to help you. That's a good thing. That's an act of faith. Faith is trusting the Lord in the storm, even when the clouds are dark and even when the waves are high. And trusting that because he has endured the ultimate storm for you, that whatever he is having you endure, which may be painful, it's not because he doesn't love you, because he has shown how much he loves you. And it's not because he's not powerful. And that just because you may not be able to find a reason for this storm, that doesn't mean that there is no reason. The other thing that's fascinating to me Right? And you look at what Jesus said. He said, you know, we're going to the other side. And in the same way, he has promised you something very similar. If you look at life like the Sea of Galilee, and your journey through life is like this boat ride and you're going through the Sea of Galilee, well, it doesn't really make sense to try to sail away from the storms. No, if you're in the Sea of Galilee, you're going to have storms. That's part of the Christian life. But you know what Jesus says? He says, I'm going to get you to the other side. He has said, I'm coming soon. And when I take you home, I'm going to take you to a place where there is no suffering, no storm, no sadness, no death, no worries, only joy, only love, only perfection, only life all the time. And if Jesus has promised you that, there is no storm that can change that. Now, I'd like to end today, the end of the sermon today, the same way I began it, with poetry. But I think this is better poetry. You know, there's really two ways to look at the storms in your life. There's the first way, the Stephen Crane way, where you look at it and say, well, I can think of a reason for it, so the universe must just be this cruel, wild thing, and, you know, pain is meaningless and it doesn't matter. Okay, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is to say, you know what? I may not understand the storms in my life, but I know the Lord of the storm, and I know He's on my side. That is the viewpoint of a man called Paul Gerhardt. You know Paul Gerhardt? He's probably the most famous hymn lyricist writer in the Lutheran Church, one of the most famous in Christianity. He was a Lutheran pastor in the 1600s, and his story is really fascinating. He grew up in Europe, Northern Europe, during the 30 Years' War. And if you know anything about history, you know that time and place was one of the worst to be alive in human history. He was orphaned by the time that he was a teenager, and then by the time he was a teenager, he had seen thousands of his family members and friends and fellow people die because of the famine and the plague and the 30 Years' War. He was a Christian man, and he wanted to go into the ministry, he wanted to be a pastor. So by the time he was in his 20s, he was done with his pastoral training, but because of the political situations in Germany, he couldn't actually get a pastor job until he was in his 40s. He had to wait. And then finally, when he became a pastor, he was in his 40s. Well, he gets married, and 4 of his children die in infancy. And then his wife dies. And during his pastoral ministry, there were many times when he was doing hundreds of funerals per week because of the famine and because of the war. And so if anyone has the right to talk about the storms of life, I think it's Paul Gerhardt. And this was one of the first hymns that he wrote. Give to the winds your fears, hope, and be undismayed. God hears your sighs and counts your tears. God shall lift up your head. Through waves and clouds and storms, He gently clears the way. Wait for His time, so shall this night soon end in joyous day. Amen.